For the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, the most important meeting of the year, the 7-day two sessions, finally came to an end on March 11, 2024. It was one of the most hopeless meetings in decades. It's probably because the top echelon of the CCP doesn't know what to do in the face of the economic downturn. The Chinese public is also puzzled that over the past 2 years from 2021 to 2023, the government issued about 54 trillion RMB, or about US 7.6 trillion in banknotes. Still, the huge scale of money printing hasn't positively impacted China's economy and people's livelihood. What is going on here? Before exploring economic issues, let's first look at some of the CCP's top officials at this year's two sessions, and their occasional moves and facial expressions. China's Premier Li Qiang was supposed to be one of the main protagonists at this year's two sessions, but his normal press conference was cancelled. It was the first time in nearly 30 years that the two sessions were held without a Premier's press conference. And from this year onwards, there will be no more press conferences by the Premier after the sessions, unless there are special circumstances. This means that the position of the Premier, who oversees economic affairs, is further weakened. So this photo has become a classic. It was taken on March 11th during the closing session of the National People's Congress. Li Qiang might have dropped something and bent down to pick it up. Xi Jinping, who was next to him, was watching with interest, as were the people in the seats behind him. Li Qiang's gesture seemed fitting, making the picture a symbol of China's collapsing economy. Earlier, on March 4th, at the opening ceremony of the CPPCC meeting, Xi Jinping was seen speaking to Li Qiang. Li listened carefully with his mouth closed shut. While showing his obedience, Li Qiang seemed to be indicating that since he wasn't allowed to hold a press conference, he might as well shut up. CPPCC refers to the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference. It's a political advisory body, a central part of the CCP's United Front system, with no real legislative power. Here, on March 5th, Premier Li took a deep bow on stage before giving his report. Sitting at the back, Xi Jinping watched him with an expression as if saying, "You can bow like this to me, but not like that to the others." Another senior CCP official sitting in the first row seemed to be taken back in surprise by Li Qiang's drastic bowing motion. It has always been a point of interest for the outside world that Xi Jinping has 2 teacups for himself at the 2 sessions. This time, the Western media has made some new discoveries. Here, on March 8th, Xi Jinping was still having 2 teacups. Holding the cup, Xi had his eyes closed, looking reluctant and helpless. It's speculated that the cup might contain medicine, resulting in a painful expression on him. It's rumored that Xi has serious health concerns, so are the two connected? On March 11th, Xi walked into the venue of the closing session of the National People's Congress (NPC). In this photo next to Xi Jinping, a total of 32 faces are shown. 16 are staring at Xi the whole time, 11 are staring at Xi's back, and 5 are gazing at no one in particular. Of the 32 people, only 2 have smiles on their faces. The official in the bottom right corner tries to squeeze out a bit of a smile, but doesn't really smile. The biggest cover-up of this session was that instead of talking about economic difficulties, a new term was coined through Premier Li Qiang's report: New Quality Productivity. No one knows what this term actually means. Originally, outsiders expected that the issue of how to solve the existing difficulties of the economy would be discussed at the National People's Congress, or that more specific policy announcements would be made. But the March 5th government work report delivered by Premier Li barely touched on the major issues facing China's economy, including the real estate crisis, sluggish consumption, soaring debt, shrinking population, and deteriorating relations with major trading partners. Stocks plunged after Li Qiang delivered his government work report. The Hang Seng Index in Hong Kong, which consists mainly of blue chips from mainland China, fell by 2.6%. Perhaps these senior executives of the CCP are also wondering why the economy is still going downhill, even though they might think they had done their best. The so-called best effort of the CCP, apart from up to 100 new policies, is the issuance of about 54 trillion RMB, or about US 7.6 trillion, of banknotes between 2021 and 2023. Commenting on this, economists or fiscal experts in China said that the CCP had printed a total of 28 trillion RMB in 2022, a figure equivalent to the amount of money printed by the US, Japan, and the EU combined. Some described it as the equivalent of printing a Germany. They questioned, after printing so much money, the stock market hasn't risen much, housing prices haven't risen much, and prices haven't risen much. Why is that? During the global financial crisis in 2008, the Chinese government launched a 4 trillion RMB stimulus package. It was considered at the time to be a key initiative to facilitate rapid economic recovery. But now, having printed the equivalent of US 7.6 trillion in 2 years, the scale of which far exceeds that of 2008, the economy hasn't been revitalized. How did this figure of 7.6 trillion come to be? Let's take a look at these numbers. China's official statistics show that at the end of December 2023, China's broad money M2 balance was 292.27 trillion RMB, or 41.14 trillion. At the end of December 2022, the M2 balance was 266.43 trillion RMB, or roughly 38.15 trillion. And at the end of December 2021, the M2 balance was 238.29 trillion RMB, or about 37.4 trillion. Based on these figures, the CCP will have issued an additional 25.84 trillion RMB, or about 3.63 trillion in 2023, and an additional 28.14 trillion RMB, or about 4.03 trillion in 2022. Adding the two together, the CCP printed a whopping 53.98 trillion RMB, or about 7.6 trillion in those 2 years. Broad money M2 is calculated by adding the total amount of money in circulation in society, plus demand deposits as well as fixed and savings deposits. Theoretically, these funds should flow into the real economy to help enterprises expand employment and promote sustained economic development, thus leading to a positive chain reaction of consumption and investment. But this hasn't happened. We analyzed 3 factors that might be at play. One is the efficiency of capital allocation. There are many corrupt officials in the CCP system. They don't really think about the country and the people, but about keeping their jobs and reaping money for themselves. Therefore, a part of the additional money issued should have been transferred by officials at all levels of the party or the interest class to their personal names through various means at various stages. This means that a large amount of capital has failed to go to the real economy. The reality of officialdom in China is beyond the average audience's imagination. How ridiculous are China's corrupt officials? You can get a sense from this city's police chief when he was taken away by the disciplinary committee for investigation. Once a powerful police chief, he couldn't even walk straight at the moment of being taken away. That is to say, losing power is like losing life to the The following numbers can probably give the audience some clue as to where all the newly printed money went. Loan projections are one of the wind vane indicators of economic development. Let's take a look at the data in this regard. China's official data shows that in 2023, China's annual household loans and loans to enterprises and institutions had a ratio of roughly 20% and 80%. Among loans to enterprises and institutions, medium and long-term loans grew significantly, increasing by 13.57 trillion yuan, or about 1.93 trillion, accounting for about 76% of the incremental loans to enterprises and institutions. In contrast, the proportion of short-term loans was significantly smaller. Usually, in terms of the use of loans, medium and long-term loans are often utilized in areas such as fixed asset investment, while short-term loans are usually for the liquidity needs of borrowers in production and operation. In addition, RMB deposits increased by 25.74 trillion yuan, or approximately US 3.65 trillion for the year 2023. Household deposits increased by 16.67 trillion yuan, or approximately USD 2.37 trillion. That is to say, a portion of the new RMB issued by the CCP has been placed in the form of loans, and subsequently these funds have been turned into deposits. Loans to enterprises and institutions accounted for nearly 80% of the total. In other words, these funds were mainly taken by large state-owned enterprises such as central enterprises, institutions, or local state-owned enterprises through loans. However, after these funds have been appropriated, they haven't been invested in places where they can produce. They know very well that they can't get returns by investing the money, so some of the money has simply been saved up and turned into deposits. In the meantime, another portion has been divided up in disguise by the powerful and wealthy members of the CCP. As a result, these funds cannot really be put into circulation. In the past 2 years, many once brilliant enterprises in China have announced their closure. The catering and construction industries have fallen on hard times. All of this shows that capital isn't flowing efficiently into these key industries that create jobs and value. This was on March 11, 2024, when workers defended their rights and claimed wages at a garment factory. Police officers tried to talk to the workers. This is the kind of environment now, not only here, but it's also happening everywhere. Those who owe wages, those who are closing down. Let's be sympathetic. The second factor is market confidence. Despite the huge amount of capital injected, the market has no confidence in the various policies of the CCP. This has led to a very strange and conflicting phenomena. On the one hand, China has printed much money and issued money extensively, which meets the definition of inflation. On the other hand, this money, after being issued, hasn't really been put into circulation and entered the real economy. It has only circulated within the financial system, leading to financial idling. Therefore, the issuance of additional currency has yet to have the effect of promoting economic development. China's economy is declining and prices are falling, which means that the actual currency in circulation, the currency that really works, is actually decreasing, so deflation is occurring. The injection of huge sums of money should have increased the ability and willingness of banks to lend, thereby supporting the development of enterprises and consumers to spend. The reality is that bank lending is facing a huge bottleneck. Small and micro enterprises are the main force in absorbing employment and should be the focus of capital support. However, the difficulties faced by these enterprises are indeed the most serious. A large number of small and micro enterprises have gone out of business due to issues such as a shortened capital chain and shrinking market demand. When enterprises close, jobs disappear. Here is an ordinary college graduate in China. He travels back and forth from his hometown in Hebei province to Beijing to attend job fairs in one last push to find employment after more than 1,000 failed applications only yielded one paltry offer. I feel that there's quite a bit of pressure in the job hunt this year. After the 3-year pandemic, most companies have had to shut down or lay off employees, and the ones that survived are struggling to stay afloat. Consequently, their recruitment drive is not as aggressive as it used to be. The wave of business closures and declining revenues have increased the risk for banks considerably, leading them to be more cautious in lending. Under these circumstances, even small and micro enterprises in desperate need of liquidity are finding it difficult to obtain loans, not to mention those that are heavily indebted. Under this complicated economic environment, banks and lending institutions are in a dilemma. On the one hand, they need to support economic growth through lending. On the other hand, they have to face potential losses due to high risks. The real estate industry, which has been the mainstay of China's rapid economic growth over the past 3 decades, is now facing the bursting of a bubble. The CCP has invested too much money in infrastructure, including real estate, but this infrastructure is already bubbling up, and the properties built will eventually become useless steel and concrete junk. For various financial institutions, reinvesting in them will be meaningless if they can't make any money. As a result, major banks in China are now very cautious about lending to real estate and infrastructure. China's Vanke, for example, has long been seen as a leading developer backed by the central government in Beijing and with close ties to the government. On March 11, 2024, the ratings company Moody's downgraded Vanke's corporate rating to junk status and warned of a possible further downgrade of Vanke's credit rating. Moody's expects that the unstable operating and financing environment in China's real estate sector will continue to weigh on Vanke's contracted sales, and the likelihood of obtaining improved access to financing in the next 12 to 18 months remains limited. Unlike developers such as Evergrande and Country Garden, Vanke is a state-owned real estate company backed by the CCP government and 33.4% owned by Shenzhen Metro, a company owned by Shenzhen State-Owned Capital Supervisory Body. Reuters reported that two sources said that under pressure, the CCP has asked banks to increase financing supports for Vanke. Then, on March 12th, news broke that 6 state-owned banks and 6 joint stock banks were raising up to 80 billion yuan in loans for Vanke to meet the future maturity of its open market bond repayments. A reporter from China's financial media, Blue Whale, was told by a source close to the above banks, "I have heard of the relevant news, but at present the banks are conservative in their attitude, but due to other factors, it is estimated that in the end there is a little possibility of success." Another source close to the above bank said, "It isn't yet decided." It's still not clear what kind of loans the banks will give to Vanke, which the CCP is supporting, let alone other real estate companies. The fact that China's top housing and urban development official has made statements like this shows that the CCP is really at its wit's end. I also need to emphasize here that for housing enterprises that are seriously insolvent and have lost their operating ability, they should be allowed to go bankrupt or restructured according to legal and market-based rules. For those who have behaviors that are detrimental to the interests of the public, they should be resolutely investigated and dealt with in accordance with the law, so that they can pay the price they deserve. The second aspect of market confidence is consumer confidence. One of the purposes of the CCP's printing money desperately is that it thinks that issuing more money can stimulate economic growth. But China's biggest problem now actually lies in its lack of consumption power. One of the reasons for the lack of consumption is a massive decline in population. When there are fewer people, they naturally spend less money. A huge number of people died during the epidemic, and the CCP has been covering up the actual death toll. Another important reason is that the people have no money. As we have covered this issue many times before, rural workers at the bottom of the ladder cannot get the salary they've been working for. Here, on March 11th, 2024, a blogger filmed a middle-aged man who ate only one radish for the whole day. During conversation, it was learned that the man was traveling out of town to collect the wages owed to him for 10 years. The man said, "It's me who is too weak. The boss told me to sue wherever I want." The blogger bought lunch for the man and refused to take his money. He said, "I ate your radish too." Only then did the man accept the boxed lunch. It was obvious that he was really hungry. This phenomena of unpaid wages is spreading to the higher social strata. With the worsening of local debts, civil servants in many cities are unable to receive their full salaries. The less money you have, the less you dare to spend. For Chinese consumers, incomes are falling instead of rising, job opportunities are shrinking, and the cost of living continues to rise. Under such circumstances, how dare they spend money? Therefore, they choose to save as much as possible instead of spending. How can the capital flow mechanism be improved and consumer confidence restored? The CCP is incapable of solving such problems. It's not at all surprising that the top officials of the CCP, including the party leader and the Chinese premier, look so dull and hopeless at the two sessions.